Thank you very much for having me. They knew a surefire way to make sure that the energy stayed in the room following that was to have the guy come on and talk about cancer and heart disease. It's a way to keep everybody up. No, I often talk about journeys, and I think probably everybody here has a really interesting journey that led you to this place on this day, and why you're working with Novartis, why you got into the areas that you did, and why you're here today. For me, my journey here began back in 1989. I was a senior in high school. I just started my last year of school. I'd already gotten early admission into the college that I wanted to go into. So life was good. It was all set up to be a great senior year. I had maybe 2 real classes. The rest was going to be a blow-off year. Everybody was just jealous of my schedule. It was great. Then in September of 1989, just a couple weeks into the school year, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. I had lymph node popped up on the side of my neck that I hadn't felt before. I knew it was something unusual. Went to the doctor. We did a prescription for a couple of weeks. Nothing happened. Tried another prescription, and 2 weeks later, that node was still there, and 2 more had popped up on the other side of my neck. And so that's when they did a biopsy and determined that it was cancer. My first day as an official cancer patient was quite an experience. One of the things they want to do with Hodgkin's and probably a lot of different cancers, but for me, specifically with Hodgkin's, they wanted to stage the disease and figure out exactly where you were in the disease. The way they do that is they divide your body into 4 quadrants, down the middle and at the diaphragm. And based on where you have cancer, you're either in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or stage 4, depending on how many of your quadrants have cancer. And then you're either an A or a B, depending on whether or not you're displaying symptoms of the disease. And I wasn't having any symptoms. I felt completely fine. There was nothing outwardly physically wrong with me except for these bumps on my neck. I had bumps on both sides of my neck, so I knew that at a minimum I was stage 2. Luckily, throughout the staging process, there was nothing below my diaphragm, so I ended up being a stage 2A. But the way they came to determine that was a series of rather invasive procedures. The very first thing my doctor did, and I'd known him for about 15 minutes at this point, was to do a bone marrow biopsy. Now, I don't know if anybody here has been a part of a bone marrow biopsy, seen one done, or actually gotten a chance to be the lucky patient, but when a doctor tells you that they usually don't hurt, he is lying to you. Essentially what they do, and they typically go into the hip, because the hip is a nice big bone, it's close to the surface. They take this little thing that looks somewhat like an apple core punch, and then they proceed to push it into your hip bone, and then following that, you and the doctor engage in tug of war for a little while he tries to remove the bone. And I'm laying there, and he's struggling and sweating, and I'm whimpering and sweating, and he's cursing all the milk that I obviously drank as a kid, and we're going back and forth for a while. And he had done nothing to prepare us for what was happening. My parents were still sitting in the room while this was going on, and my mother is there, and I can hear her quietly crying in the corner, and so I muster enough strength to tell my dad to get her out of there. So he takes her back out into the waiting room, and we finish the procedure. And once he gets the bone out, then he's able to go in and pull a little of the marrow out with a needle to do the test. But when I was first diagnosed, the day I was told that I had the Hodgkin's, I didn't truly understand what it meant to be a cancer patient. When I was 18, and when you're 18, you're kind of an idiot, and it's the way it is, I knew life would change. I knew that I was now a cancer patient, but it was very much an iceberg. I could just see what was above the surface. I had no idea of everything that was below the surface, of just how much being a cancer patient was going to change who I was and the course of my life. I got a bit of a sense of that during my bone marrow biopsy. It was a hard and heavy lesson on what I was about to experience. The next day I went in and had a lengthy CAT scan to see all of my body, to see where things were. at that point, I also went through what's called a lymphangiogram. I don't even think they do them anymore, but they take this blue dye and inject your feet with it so that the lymph nodes in your feet kind of pop up and are easy to see. Fun thing is you have Smurf feet for the next month or so while the dye is still sitting there. But they find the little lymph nodes in the tops of your feet, and they thread these little tubes into the lymph nodes and drip this dye into you. And it's a pretty lengthy process. It takes about 7 hours or so while you're laying there on the table while this is all happening. And of course, you have to lay very still because you don't want to pull anything out of your feet. And so it's very much an exercise in self-control and discipline to lay there on the table like that. But it allows them to get a full idea of what's going on inside your body. And so after 2 days and being stage 2A and really a crash course in what it means to be a cancer patient, I was ready for my treatments. Now at that point I was 18 and my doctor was toggling back and forth between whether or not he was going to do chemotherapy or radiation. They decided they wanted to spare me chemotherapy. I was young, the disease wasn't that advanced, and the disease itself, Hodgkin's, is a pretty curable cancer. So we went with radiation. We went with radiation over the course of 5 months. So every day after school I began to drive to the hospital, and by 3:30 each afternoon I'd be going through radiation from 3:30 to about 4. I had radiation on my neck, my chest, and my abdomen. Instead of a splenectomy, which is fairly common in Hodgkin's patients, they decided to just go ahead and radiate my spleen versus actually taking it out. Now at this point I was kind of feeling like that I got a bum rap. I had set myself up to have this great senior year where there was going to be nothing to worry about. And all of a sudden I was a cancer patient fighting to stay alive. And I felt like that was maybe a little unfair, that didn't God understand that I had 4 study halls that year? And I was supposed to be screwing around all day, not worried about radiation that afternoon. But I go into radiation, and because you're there at the same time every day, you often see the same people in the waiting room. And my first week there, there's a 6-year-old boy having radiation on his brain tumor. And he probably doesn't quite understand what's going on, but I certainly do. And I've got, the Hodgkin's, I've got the most curable cancer you can have. I knew what was happening to him. His mother, who was there sitting with him, certainly knew what was happening with him. And it was pretty easy for me to stop feeling sorry for myself to right there. Life deals you bad days. Bad things are going to happen. That's just a reality. But it could be so much worse. It always could be so much worse. And that was a pretty early lesson for me as I sat there across from the 6-year-old and his mother. But I went through my radiation, and I certainly had some tough days. And radiation itself is a weird sensation. I mean, you go in and you lay under this giant machine that's got the big nuclear stamp on the side of it, so that you don't have any mistakes that this is not a good thing for you. And they put these little lead blocks so they don't radiate your lungs, and they're telling you, don't worry, it's very precise. The beam only hits the areas that we want it to. The rest of your body will remain untouched. And just to show just how confident we are that it's so precise, we're going to go ahead and close this 6-foot thick steel door and watch you on closed circuit television outside of the room. I learned that at that point that doctors have very different definitions for things than patients do, and the word precise is one of those. And I went through my radiation, and I made it through. I finished up at the end of February. By the end of the school year, early summer, I was starting to feel somewhat normal again. And by the next year, in remission, starting college, and life was good again. I had survived my brush with cancer. Couldn't have been happier. And I really even kind of forgot about, not really forget, but it wasn't something that was a part of my daily life. Until June of 1991, I'd finished my freshman year of college, and my cancer had returned. I am the one who found it again. Another lymph node popped up on the side of my neck. as soon as I touched it, I knew what it was. I didn't need a doctor to tell me. Once you've touched cancer in your body, you don't forget what that feels like. And so when I felt it the second time, I knew exactly what it was. I sat on the information for 2 or 3 days. Ironically enough, that week's episode of Beverly Hills 90210, I never watched the show except that 1 week. Donna had a scare. I apologize to those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, but it was a horrible American television show. But Donna had a scare. She had a cancer scare, and thankfully everything was fine, and they all celebrated at the Peach Pit. But I never watched the show. So I knew when I was sitting there, and I'm like, wow, I've got this growing tumor in my neck, and nobody knows except for me. I need to move forward, and it just took me a couple of days to really get used to the idea of having cancer again, because I knew that it meant chemotherapy. I knew that that was what I was headed for. So I went in, had my biopsy, and obviously it turned out to be what I thought it was. And my doctors at that time determined that I would have a 7-drug course of chemotherapy beginning in June and ending at the end of the year. My drugs, and several of them have come back to haunt me the rest of my life, but I was on MOP-ABV, which is, the M stands for mustard nitrogen, which is actually made from mustard gas, which is a frightening thought that the Geneva Convention outlaws this thing, but we'll still inject it right into people's bloodstreams. The O is for oncovine. Then I was on procarbazine and prednisone. The A was adriamycin. The B was bleomycin, and the V was vincristine. And all of those sound as pleasant, or they were just as pleasant as they sound. The adriamycin in particular has something that has been a big part of my life for many, many years now. But so I started my chemotherapy, and it was tough. I remember I was all pretty cocky. One of the things they tell you is to watch what you eat post-chemotherapy treatments. That you're a little more susceptible to nausea and vomiting, and so not to eat cheese. Cheese was one of the things I was told to avoid. And I was like, damned if they're going to tell me I'm not going to eat cheese. Sure, yeah, I'm going to lose my hair and all that stuff, but I am not going to stop eating cheese because of cancer. So I went out and I had a nice big juicy cheeseburger after my first round of chemotherapy. I was going to show cancer who was boss. So about 4 hours later, and 3 of those hours spent in the bathroom, I determined that perhaps I could do without cheese for a few months. I wanted to have, I wanted to tackle this and to be in charge of as much as I could, because so much of it I couldn't control. But there were things I could control. I could control my attitude. I could control, feeling positive, and I thought that I could control what I ate, but it turned out that that was something that cancer was still in charge of. But I went through chemotherapy for a few weeks. A couple months in, I developed an allergic reaction to the bleomycin. My lungs actually began to shut down, and they had to pull the bleomycin. And we went through, now with the 6 drugs continuing on. I was on prednisone. I was on a really high dose of prednisone. I was on 100 milligrams a day for 14 days at a time, and then they would wean me off of 100 in 2 days. Now, if any of you have ever taken prednisone, going from 100 to 0 in 2 days is like taking a hammer to your knees. It was not a fun deal, but that was what they were doing in 1991. I went through, and chemo was tough. I mean, I experienced everything that you think of when you think of chemotherapy. I lost my hair. I had, long bouts of nausea and vomiting. I got really, really weak. So weak that my parents had to stop buying gallons of milk because I wasn't strong enough to pour cereal with a gallon of milk. I had to have something smaller because I just couldn't do it. I mean, it was unbelievable how your body just deteriorates when it's being poisoned like that. but I went through and had some really great moments, some good days in those 6 months. And so it was doable, it was livable, and there was always the goal on the other side to be cancer-free. There was always a very realistic shot that I would be cancer-free on the other side, and obviously I got through it, and life returned to normal. Things progressed. I went back to college. Ended up at this point, actually, I was going through chemotherapy in Kansas City. I was living in Kansas City at the time. Moved out to California, and life was good. Things were great. And then in late 1994, another lymph node popped up on my neck. Now I was pretty devastated. I mean, I'd already been through the radiation, I'd already been through the chemotherapy, and obviously those hadn't worked. So I really didn't have any idea what they were going to do, what they could do. At this point, I was being treated out at the City of Hope out in the Los Angeles area, and my doctor's like, well, you know what we can do? We can give you intense chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant. Now I had to stop him because I was pretty sure that what I'd been through in '91 was intense chemotherapy. So I didn't think he could deliver on his promise to ramp it up. I was wrong. He absolutely did. What they decided to do with me was, it was a fairly new protocol. They were kind of still experimenting with exactly all the drugs that were a part of it, the length of time. This was early 1995, and they were still kind of monkeying with this course of chemotherapy and stem cell transplant that they were going to do on me. At that point, they had determined we were going to do 4 cycles, and each cycle would consist of me going into the hospital, 3 days of hydration, followed by 3 straight days of chemotherapy drip, 72 hours nonstop of chemotherapy. Then we'd kind of hang out for a couple of days while the chemo worked its way out of my body. Then we'd give me my marrow back, and hopefully within a week or so, my cells would start or my blood counts would start to rebound, and I could go home for 2 weeks. And then we'd come back and we'd do that all over again, and I was supposed to do that 4 times. I ended up doing it 3 times because after the 3rd time, my body showed some damage. One of the chemotherapy drugs they were using to ramp it up was more adriamycin. I'd already had adriamycin in '91. They gave me more adriamycin in '95. They know adriamycin has the potential to be heart toxic. Typically it's not, but it's not unheard of either. Nowadays, when they give adriamycin, they also give a drug to help protect your heart from the adriamycin. This wasn't what they were doing in '95, and sure enough, my heart showed damage, so we ended up stopping the course of chemotherapy and the stem cell transplant after three cycles. But it was, being in the hospital and being isolated for days and weeks at a time, and it's a tough place to be. I mean, you go days where you can't eat. You're not seeing very many people because it's a bit of a hassle to clean up and put a gown on and to come visit you, and they can only stay for such a limited time, and you spend a lot of time awake and alone with your thoughts, and there were many moments during my bone marrow transplant where I was afraid to fall asleep, where I knew that my body was too weak to wake up again, and that if I fell asleep at night, there's no way I'd make it to morning. I just knew it. But I did, and there were times where I wanted to sit down and write letters to my family because I knew I was going to die, and I wanted them to have at least my final thoughts about them that they could hold on to when it was all over. But I never had the energy or the strength to actually sit down and write those letters. It was tough. It was a brutal process. I began it in early January, and I finished my 3rd cycle on April 25th. That's when they let me go home, and thankfully, they did find the key to curing my Hodgkin's disease. After that, the Hodgkin's has not ever returned, and that was now almost 15 years ago. Now you may notice that when Sheldon was introducing me, he mentioned 4-time cancer survivor. Well, we've only up to 3. So yes, I did get rid of the Hodgkin's disease once and for all, but there was still one more little beautiful diagnosis waiting for me around the corner. At this point, I had started working. I was a writer for Fox Sports, which is the dream job. I was 25 years old, working in sports television, getting to write off my cable. How cool was that? And it's, oh no, I need the Sports Illustrated for my job. And life was great. And things were wonderful. I had the heart condition, but I was being treated medically for that. For me, it was a minor thing. I didn't have cancer anymore, so I had a little bit of a weak heart. Not a big deal. I was, loving life. Things were going great. And I started having nosebleeds. Started having these giant bruises on my body, and the kind of bruises that you remember getting, and I had no idea where they were coming from. So I went to see my hematologist. He did a quick blood test and brought me into his little office there afterwards and sat me down and told me that I had developed an acute secondary leukemia caused by chemotherapy from earlier drugs. And it was July 23rd, 1997. I can take myself back to that day as if it was yesterday. It was a shot to the solar plex. If you've ever had the wind knocked out of you, that's exactly how I felt at that moment. I knew he had just told me that I was dead. At this point, I'm an 8-year veteran of this fight against cancer. I know the score. Leukemia is bad. Leukemia that's caused by chemotherapy is worse. Plus, I had this weak heart, so I knew they couldn't be that aggressive in how they treated me. And when he told me that I had leukemia on that day, he told me that I was going to die. No, he didn't say those words, but he didn't have to. I knew that he had just signed my death sentence. And I remember that day sitting there, and I was pretty low on blood counts. And so as I'm sitting there right after diagnosis, and they've got me in like this little ambulatory room where I'm getting blood and platelets, and I spent about 3 hours there waiting for some of my family to arrive. I'd called my dad. He was the closest geographically to where I was, and waiting for people to come. And I just was sobbing, and I couldn't get over the life that I was about to lose. And I knew it was. I was in mourning for all the things I would never get to do. And I wasn't quite 26 years old yet, and I just couldn't fathom that things were happening so fast. This had come on quickly, and so I knew that I had probably no more than a few months left. Maybe with treatments they could delay that. And so this was July, and I was laying there doing the math in my head, and I'd kind of come up with a deal to make with God, where if God would just get me to Christmas and get me through the holidays so I didn't, die right before the holidays and ruin them for everybody. If I could get through one more Christmas season, then whatever happened after that was fine. That I could live with him taking me July or January 2nd on. But if he just got me through the holidays, then he and I were going to be cool. And it was a really weird thing to just accept your death. Now, I see a couple people who are nervous. I made it to Christmas. I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead because there were a couple people who were struggling. I did make it to Christmas. Like I said, I had the heart condition, so they couldn't treat me normally. They couldn't use adriamycin. They couldn't use the chemotherapy drug that caused the leukemia, so my doctors had to kind of go and sit in a little room and figure out exactly what they were going to do for me. And I've always joked with him that he's basically just a bartender trying to figure out, a little cocktail that works. Luckily for me, they found a cocktail that worked. Now, it was 3 long years of chemo. I began in July of 1997, and I took my last chemotherapy treatment in July of 2000. It was a long 3 years, but I did make it to Christmas. I've made it to quite a few Christmases since then. And I survived my 4th bout with cancer, and I am here now going on 13 years later, and still very much alive and still very much cancer-free. And I couldn't be more thrilled. But chemotherapy is tough stuff. It really beats the crap out of your body over the course of years. Also in 2000, along with finishing my chemotherapy, I had my left shoulder and my right hip replaced. That prednisone that I was talking about, a lot of prednisone over the years, and prednisone tends to gather in long bones and cause necrosis. And so that's what happened. My shoulder and my hip both died and had to be replaced, so I've got titanium. Now fortunately it's on both sides, so I don't walk with a list, but I can promise you this: you do not want to be behind me at airport security. Yeah, it's tough to explain why it is that you're setting things off when there's nothing to feel there. My joints actually work quite well, so if anybody is in here needing a joint replacement, feel free. It's good stuff. My right hip, which is my fake hip, actually has a better range of motion than my real hip, so I'm thinking of going in and requesting to have the other hips done. 2000, that was what happened in 2000. 2001, I went to my doctor, and my heart condition was continuing to deteriorate. And he told me that the only long-term solution for me, and seeing as at that point I was only 29 years old, I was all for long-term solutions. He told me that I'd have to have a heart transplant. And that took me back a little bit. And spent a day kind of thinking about that. It's like, wow, okay, heart transplant. All right, we can do that. In 2001, they put me on the heart transplant waiting list. I also got my first pacemaker in 2001. By 2003, that pacemaker had been upgraded to a pacemaker/defibrillator. In 2005, that pacemaker was recalled by the manufacturer. Yes, it was just a set of tires. We'll just put new ones on. I had to go in and have a surgery to replace that pacemaker with a new one, made by the same manufacturer, which little difficult to deal with, but I made it through. And then in 2006, October 10th, 2006, I got that most amazing phone call that I've ever received in my life. Phone rang about 3:45 in the afternoon. I didn't initially answer it. It rang right back. I thought, okay, whoever it is on the other side wants to get a hold of me pretty badly. So I went and picked up the phone, and the woman on the other side said, "This is Dorothy at UCLA. We have your heart. Get here as quickly as possible." And such a cool moment, such an amazing day, a series of events and emotions and everything were set into motion by that one call. And I had spent some time, because I'd been on the list for 5.5 years waiting for the heart. And I'd spent some time getting used to the idea of the heart transplant. Most specifically, I knew it was going to be a wonderful day for me and my family. It was going to be a day of celebration, that finally they were putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. And it was such a different feeling than with the cancer, because when I knew going in for the chemotherapy that I'd be coming out worse off, that they were beating my body up, and after the chemotherapy was done, I'd be in worse shape than before it began. With the heart, though, it was totally different. I was going in weak and sick, and I was going to be coming out strong and healthy and whole, and that was such an exciting thing. But I also knew that it was only going to come because another family had experienced sudden and complete tragedy. Somebody who went off to work that day, a construction worker, never got home. His family got the phone call that said, "You've got to get to the hospital because there was an accident." And I knew that my great day of joy was only going to come at that price, and it took a long time to get used to that idea that somebody was going to have to die for me to live. And I finally got to the point where I recognized that death, and obviously I'd experienced quite a few brushes with it at this point. I knew that death was a part of life. It's just a fact. And so if in the wake of somebody's death others can live, that's a pretty beautiful thing. And that night, October 10th, he saved my life. He probably saved the lives of several other people. I know his heart works great. My guess is his other organs did too. And and here I am now, almost 3.5 years later, feeling really terrific with my new beating heart. The thing that was most incredible is I'd had the heart condition since '95, so I'd had it for almost 11.5 years prior to my transplant. And you don't realize when you don't hear your heartbeat. You just forget about it. All of a sudden, I wake up from surgery, and there is this thumping going on in my chest. And it was beautiful and loud, and I couldn't sleep. For like 6 weeks, I'd lay my head down, and there'd just be that boom, boom, boom. And because I hadn't heard it for such a long time, and all of a sudden now I've got this thing just rattling away in my chest. And it was so amazing and so cool. And when you first wake up from surgery, all of a sudden you've got energy and you have a blood pressure again. But prior to my transplant, my blood pressure was 80/50. It was low. All of a sudden I was 125/70. I mean, I had pink in my face again, which was amazing. Everybody, they would come into the room, they're like, "Oh my God, look at you." And and even though I had just had my chest cracked and it felt like there was an 800-pound man sitting on my chest, I felt awesome and just wanted to get up and dance around because I just had energy, and I hadn't had energy in such a long time. It was such an amazing experience. Now, when I went into UCLA that day for my transplant, I had a lot. They hadn't done a transplant in about 3 weeks, which for UCLA is a very long time. They do about 100 to 105 transplants a year. So they do a lot of heart transplants, and they hadn't done one for 3 weeks. So they were all like really excited when I got the call and when I came in. And let me give you, if you are ever frustrated at hospital admissions, tell them you're there for a heart transplant. You fly through. I mean, it is awesome. It's like red carpet. And it's UCLA, so it's LA, so I go in and everybody's like, who's that guy? He must be somebody big. I mean, look how fast he made it in. But it's, just say heart transplant. You can sort out the problems later when they find out you won. But, I flew through, and so I'm sitting there in the room waiting to go down to surgery, and every possible doctor's coming and visiting me, and they're just excited to have me there. And somebody comes up and says, "Hey, we're doing a new study on a drug. It's called Certican. We feel good about it. We was seeing some great results in Europe. We're excited to try it out in patients here in the U.S. We just were approved a week ago. We haven't had any patients yet to sign up on it. Would you be willing to be a part of this study?" And my doctors assured me that he was very excited about the possibilities of the drug. And so I signed up for this study where I got both Neural and Certican, courtesy of Novartis. And as you can see, I had pretty good results. When I was there in the hospital during that week, and I was out of the hospital 7 days later. It's amazing how quick they get you out. But I knew going into the transplant I wanted to do something physical, something to celebrate my new life. And so I decided on a triathlon and was looking ahead at doing the Malibu Triathlon in September of 2007. So it was going to be about 11 months after transplant, which I'll admit turned out probably maybe a little fast but I was excited and I wanted to get started, and so I got out of the hospital and started making plans for the Malibu Triathlon, and bought a bicycle and started doing some workouts again and feeling really good about the way things were going and the medications. I was really terrified going in that I was going to be a slave to the medications. When you're preparing yourself for life post-transplant, I went and I was like, I'm going to be taking pills 6 times a day. If you're an hour late, you're going to be dead. All these things where you just start thinking in your head, what's rejection going to be like and how do you prevent it? So I went and got a watch that had all these different alarms on it. Maybe it was because I wanted the watch, but I justified it as, I'm going to need to have an alarm go off every 2 hours to let me know that I take my pills. Well, turns out it's not like that at all. It's not nearly as complicated as I thought it would be. Early on, I was taking pills 4 times a day, which was easy enough to do. breakfast, lunch, dinner, bedtime. Now I take pills twice a day. It's a pretty healthy handful of pills, but I get a heart out of the deal. I mean, I'll do a lot more than take 2 handfuls of pills if I can keep my heart. And so my experience with that has been fantastic, and the side effects have been pretty minimal. I mean, there's a few things. I mean, obviously I have a low immune system, and as you can probably hear, I've got a bit of a cold, which is pretty common. I spend a lot of my time walking around with a cold that I can't shake, but I got this heart that just beats like none other. And so I did my Malibu triathlon, and I was like, well, I want to keep doing this. I really had a good time. I mean, the moment of crossing that finish line, and after having gone through what I did, and being a heart transplant and being a cancer survivor, and really kind of reclaiming the physical me when I crossed that finish line was powerful, and I wanted to do more. So I went and did a slightly longer triathlon, and I was actually out in Hawaii for that Olympic distance race. And Hawaii is also known for a rather big race. They do the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii every October. So when you're on the island there's all kinds of Ironman stuff around, and you see it all. And so somebody was joking with me that I should try to do the Ironman, and I was just like, okay, that's funny. It's ridiculous, though. I had a heart transplant. I mean, I'm not, they didn't remake me into Lance Armstrong. They just gave me a working heart. So, but it was kind of a fun idea to think about, and so I tossed it around a little bit, and I started looking at the Ironman schedule. And my transplant was October 10th, 2006, and it just so happened that the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii in 2009 were on October 10th. So I saw that and I thought, wow, I really need to see if this is possible, because how cool would that be? What a way to spend an anniversary. So I started talking to my doctor, and I asked him if it was even something that I could consider, let alone actually do. And he said, well, that's interesting. He goes, I suppose if you worked hard, you could get your heart to do that. So as far as I was concerned, that was his, ringing endorsement of the idea. So I started petitioning the Ironman people, because for the Ironman World Championship, well, for those of you who don't know what an Ironman is, it's a triathlon, but a fairly long one. It is a 2.4 mile swim, a 112-mile bike, and then a full marathon. And you start at 7 a.m. and you have to be done by midnight. So you have 17 hours to cover 140.6 miles, basically. And so I started petitioning Ironman, because for the World Championship, you either have to qualify, which I was not ever going to do, or you get invited by Ironman and NBC Sports, because they broadcast the race. And they pick a handful of people every year to profile because of their story. Well, they'd never had a heart transplant patient do the Ironman in Kona. So I petitioned them, and they said yes. And I began my quest for Ironman, and I got a nice assist from all of you. I'm not sure if you're aware of that or not, but you helped me a great deal. Novartis became my chief sponsor for Ironman, and provided me a lot of assistance in getting there. And in October of 2009, I became the first heart transplant patient to ever participate in the Ironman World Championship. Now, I use the word participate. I would love to say I was the first heart transplant to finish the Ironman, but I did not finish the race this year. Over the course of the day, they have time cutoffs. You have to finish the swim in 2 hours and 20 minutes. You have to be done with the bike ride by 5:30 that evening, and you have to be off the run course by midnight. So 2:20 is the swim. I got out of the water, finishing my 2.4 mile ocean swim, at 2:20:07. Yes. That's what I felt. It was very, very sad and very disappointing. I had logged an awful lot of hours training and a lot of miles training, and I came up 7 seconds short on the swim. It's an ocean swim, and it's 1.2 miles straight out into the ocean and then 1.2 miles back. When you get out there, it gets a little wavy. And I actually, most of my swim back in was feeling very, very seasick. And there were a couple times where I was afraid that I was going to barf right there in the water. But of course, because I was an invitee of NBC, there were cameras around. So I've got cameras on either side of me on boats, and I'm trying desperately to hold it. It's like, if you can just make it to transition, I'll be in a tent by myself, and then you can barf to your heart's content. But so, what made me sad was that I physically really felt good that day. I felt like that I had a good, strong swim pace, and I was as surprised as anybody when they told me that I'd missed the cutoff. I mean, I got out of the water, I'm on the steps coming up, and there's a time guy right there in front of me stopping me saying, "We're sorry you didn't make it." And I was stunned. The nice thing about finishing only 7 seconds too long is that it adds to your story. So NBC and Ironman have invited me back, and I get to go back in 2010 and try it again. This time it'll be October 9th, not October 10th, but I figured the next day, as I'm shining my new medal, I can celebrate my anniversary then. But you know, there were people like, how do you get yourself motivated to go back and try to do it again? I mean, you train for 9 months and then boom, like that, it's over with and you don't finish. And how do you get yourself ready to do that? And I was like, well, I've had a couple of bad days in my life. And so to have one bad swim, that's not about to derail that plan and that goal and that journey. I mean, when I cross that finish line, it's going to be such an exclamation point on my survival. And I truly will close the chapter of my life that is 4 bouts with cancer, recovering with a heart transplant, and I will just be Kyle again. And that is, you know, one of the things when you're a patient, that's the thing you want most, is just to be a normal guy. Now, maybe it's hard to always, you know, I mean, at some point I guess I'll always be the heart transplant guy. But you know, I just want to feel good and feel normal and feel healthy and feel strong. And not that I don't feel that now, but I just know crossing that finish line is really going to underscore it and bold it and put it in italics and any other way on a word processor that you can set some text apart from. And so I'm just, you know, I'm so excited, and it's, you know, there's a lot of talk about the people in the world who are lifesavers and who have devoted their lives to helping other people. And the doctors get all the glory because they're the ones who are right there treating you. But everybody in this room here today is every bit as much a part of that team as my doctors are. And you know, I know you feel separate from patients, but the works that you do are every bit as vital as the decisions that doctors make. I wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for some terrific medications that wiped out my cancer and some amazing medications that you guys have made that not only keep my body from rejecting my heart, but they do it in a way that allows me to go out and compete in triathlons and actually dream of the Ironman as a realistic goal. And so I can't thank you guys enough for what you've done for me and what you've done for hundreds and thousands of patients just like me. And so thank you very much for inviting me here to Switzerland and being a part of this. I've had a great time, and I think we're going to do some question and answers as well. So please, thank you very much for having me.